What up, friends? I'm James, your host, and today we're going to be reviewing Injury Reserve's newest album, By the Time I Get to Phoenix. Injury Reserve are, of course, an experimental hip-hop group out of Arizona, and they've been gaining quite a bit of traction in the scene at the moment thanks to Richie and Groggs' very fun and energizing flows, along with Parker's very experimental production. Unfortunately, By the Time I Get to Phoenix comes to us after some pretty heartbreaking events, as it's preceded by Groggs' death. It's already been a year since that happened, and the future of the group is pretty uncertain. However, for the time being, the guys are continuing to just propel themselves forward, delivering one of the most experimental and interesting rap albums I think I've ever listened to. It's kind of divisive, but I mean, this is some crazy stuff. Outside immediately sets the stage with this manic sample and billowing synth. Richie's flow is sharp and static, really fitting the lyrics about America's social climate at the moment and how we're more divided than ever. It gets even more chaotic as we realize that all this fence-sitting and refusing to acknowledge the problems that plague this country are what's killing us. And this is especially true for the most vulnerable members of our society. It isn't the most harsh and experimental beat on here, however, I really think it does a good job in conveying the seriousness of these problems, especially in the more electronic final third of the track. Superman That is one of the lead singles and by far the biggest outlier in terms of sound. The dance rhythms, heavy synths and samples, and super melodic vocals create a really slick wall of sound effect. The vocal effects added onto Richie's flows also add a really erratic nature to the track that fits it nicely. In a strange way, it also is a very lonely sounding song, I think, especially when Groggs' verse comes in. The sense of weight is seriously felt, like he's just been beaten until he's broken, and I think a lot of us felt this way in the wave of last year's, protests against police brutality. With SS San Francisco, these sludgy flows really help it stand out. It kind of expresses a steady decline and descent into madness. The background vocals especially kind of sound like a deep cut that might be on the Gorillaz self-titled or something like that. Zaluper Z's verse was really well done, and it transitions into Richie's verse really nicely. The bass is groovy, but it has a sinister vibe to it. It really fits the undertones of the song overall, I think. In Footwork in a Forest Fire, the droning instrumental is a really intense backdrop to Groggs' manic flows. There's some crazy energy to them, inspiring people to protect and stand up for themselves. Richie's smoother flows, in contrast, make this back and forth really engaging. The instrumental just falls apart at the end, but in a good way. It's kind of like creating a picture of a hero who is struggling but still trying to stand up and persevere. Ground Zero largely continues the vibe from the previous song, albeit in a more somber way. The droning beat is a lot colder this time around, with Richie seemingly showcasing the perspective of a healthcare worker during the COVID pandemic and all the shit that they have to deal with. Or it could also be coming from the perspective of all the stuff that he's doing to protect himself from COVID, and doing all that right is really the only thing that you could be bragging about in 2020. Or it could even be commentating on how just wearing a mask is apparently too much to ask of some people. I do think it does feel a little underdeveloped on the production side of things, and overall it feels just a bit aimless and directionless, which is a project going into the middle part of this record, I find. Smoke Don't Clear is another sort of directionless track with some pretty left field vocal passages that last until we get to the verse. I'm not really sure how I feel about it, although I don't think it's bad. The beat is fuzzy and distorted, yet strangely fits Richie's delivery quite nicely, and it even has a smoothness to it in a weird way. It seems to be a battle cry of sorts on how we have so much to overcome back in 2020 and as a society as a whole. Top Picks for You is a tad bit repetitive in terms of its beat, and the pitch-shifted intro repeating throughout a lot of this song doesn't really help that fact very much. However, I do think Richie's verses are quite good, talking about how Groggs' legacy is kind of frozen in time on the internet through algorithms, social media, that sort of thing. It's kind of heartbreaking and melancholic in a way, how you don't even really have control of your own death anymore considering your data is still used on these platforms even after you die. Like, it's an interesting thought to think about. I just wish it didn't really meander around so much from an instrumental standpoint. Next up, we got Wild Wild West, and I'm gonna be honest, I have no clue what the hell they're talking about on this one. I wanna say that it's making fun of, like, that 5G conspiracy theory that was going around and how, like, misinformation can feel like a battle in every conversation. Also, maybe how misinformation has been a real problem during the pandemic, but I mean, I don't know. The beat is pretty intense and also really matches their energy, maybe serving as evidence of, like, the psyche a person needs to have to even believe in this shit in the first place, you know, and how they're making fun of that. But who knows, really? Again, it kind of just feels aimless and goes everywhere without a care for direction, although I will say it fits a bit more in this context. Now, Postpostpartum. Other than the next track, this is by far one of the best songs on the record. The distorted jazz rap beat with full bass and just pain-stricken vocals, like, it's incredible. The synth and drums are a lush backdrop to Richie's cries and reminiscence on his life, his career, and just his experiences in general. It also showcases a sort of fight against nihilism when he should be honored, but now they run in laps around me. Like, how he just can't help but feel pissed off, and how people who copied his style are gaining more success than he did, who originated that style. It's a really somber track, and honestly, I feel like this song is one of the best examples of the more emotional side of Injury Reserve. Now we get to Knees, and this might be tied with the last track for my favorite on the record. What a heart-wrenching and nostalgic track, man. Looking back at childhood when things used to be so much simpler and you just didn't really have to deal with the darker sides of life. That repetitive, jagged, and soulful beat, it's the perfect backdrop for this topic. Hearing Groggs one last time really puts it all into perspective, especially in his line, "Okay, this one is my last one." Probably said that about the last one. Honestly, there's nothing really more to say. Like, this is a track that you just have to experience to fully appreciate it. The last track, By Storm, has a surprisingly upbeat and driving instrumental to it. However, the lyrics suggest that this is the exact opposite of that. I think the duality in this song, because of this fact, is just fantastic, and it kind of showcases how they want to feel better, but they just can't bring themselves to move on just yet. The fuzzy guitar that's sort of droning on seems like it wants to overtake Richie's vocals, but he just won't let it. Probably to symbolize Richie not wanting to let go of all the times that they've had with Groggs. And honestly, I think it's summed up best by the last line, "It rains, it pours, but damn, it's really pouring." What a beautiful outro. This is a super experimental listen, and no doubt it's going to be pretty divisive. Honestly, I love a lot of what they're putting down here. I mean, you can tell they're just running on pure emotion. I do think that the album does have some problems in feeling aimless and directionless, especially in the middle of the record. I suppose this could be the point, kind of a stream of consciousness style, and more power to that, but I just feel like it's too short and underdeveloped in this case, especially when songs only have like an intro and a verse. I feel like they could have added more to that. And not a knock against the album, but I thought it was interesting how Groggs wasn't really on this album much at all. Before this released, I could have sworn they said that this was already pretty much almost done before he died. I wonder if they were talking maybe about the production side of things, or maybe they just scrapped a lot of stuff because what they had just wouldn't be fitting for the circumstances. Who knows? But just an interesting observation. Either way, it's a very poignant and admirable record, and even if some of it isn't really my thing, I can really see this becoming super influential down the road, especially if more rappers hop on this sort of like post-rap thing that Injury Reserve is doing here. And finally, one last rest easy to Groggs. Cheers, man. You'll never be forgotten. I'm feeling a strong 7 on Injury Reserve's By the Time I Get to Phoenix. And of course, we do have to talk about the album cover on this show. And of course, this is another great album cover by Injury Reserve. I really like the last one on their self-titled, and this is no different. The harsh red is really striking. The sort of fuzzy and distorted image of the person with the glowing orb head I think that's really well done. I think Parker designed this cover just like he did with the last one. He definitely has an eye for design, an eye for detail, and I think it just captures the feelings of sadness and anger and dread and all of that sort of stuff that's discussed on the album. So, good job on that. And that's all I have to say about this one. What did you guys think about it? Is this a record that's going to go down in the history books, do you think? Is it going to inspire, a new genre? Did you also feel like I did, where it was an admirable sort of outing? However, it kind of missed the mark in a few places? Let me know. Be sure to like, comment, and subscribe. Ring the bell if you like this video, if you want to follow me for more stuff. And until the next one, farewell.